to open with a couple of opening comments. We do have some prepared questions by the legislative committee that puts this forum on. And after that, we're going to open it up for questions in the audience. With that, Senator Sigemar? Or did you guys already?
Yeah, we kind of decided.
Representative Best?
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, am I coming through okay? No
Yes.
feedback?
Very good.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ed, for hosting us. Thank you to St. Anthony's Hospital for having this today, and thank everybody out here for coming in and listening to what we have to say. My 5th week as a representative in the state of Iowa, and this has been a very exciting time for me. And just to give you all a little bit of a civics lesson here, I'm learning how to draft a bill. And a bill basically starts as an idea in your head, and then it goes to the Legislative Services Agency, who will help draft the bill, make the bill for you. And I have drafted a bill, and I guess I shouldn't call it a bill because it's not a bill yet. It's actually still in the drafting stage, and I'll need some co-signers. But I said when I ran for office that I believe that private schools should be allowed a little bit more for their tuition credits. And so I'm drafting one right now that would give private schools a credit of up to 50% of the first $1,000 that you spend on tuition, which basically means that instead of $250 tax credit, it would go up to $500. So that's my first bill. Also, yesterday I spent about an hour here at the hospital speaking with Karen Tim and her staff about mental health issues. And mental health is it's a really important issue for the state of Iowa. Obviously there's been a little bit of controversy about the closing of a couple of the mental health institutions that we have. And I think what's going to happen is this is going to go into more of a, with the Branstad and the Affordable Care Act, things that are taking place right now, you're going to see a lot more of a push towards home community-based support, which means getting as many folks out of institutions as possible. I think that what we have in Carroll here for mental health is a fantastic thing. It's great to have a place that can serve folks that have mental health conditions that do need to be observed and put into an acute care situation, to have that available here in our own front yard. And so we need to take advantage and be appreciative of what we have here. One thing I did learn, that a lot of the problems that we have in mental health has as much to do with the human infrastructure. We need to get more psychiatrists and nurse practitioners who specialize in that area. One thing that I found out at the State House this week is that Iowa ranks 50th in the nation in psychiatrists per capita. So one thing that we really have to push is getting more mental health professionals in our state. One thing that is in the governor's budget, and I believe will be supported, is that we're going to try to encourage internists and folks that are interested in psychiatry to stay in the state through some scholarship funding and things like that. One last thing I wanted to touch on here before we get started is there is a Human Capital Enrichment Advisory Council that is being introduced as a bill. And I'm just going to read this one paragraph to you. The new code section provides that the purpose of the council is to advise the governor, the General Assembly, and the state on the alignment of education, workforce, and economic development policies that meet the needs of employers, grow family incomes, improve worker skills of both individuals and the workforce generally, and make communities more vibrant and attractive places to live. And this is exactly, I believe, being addressed here when I read the Carroll paper yesterday about area students, businesses, connect through DMAC Career Day. And I think that kind of goes in line with what the state is trying to do here, in that this bill will just name some folks who would be liaisons, I believe, and experts in trying to decide what we can do to keep a skilled workforce and get that going here in the state of Iowa. So that bill number is HSB 136, if anybody's interested in that. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mark.
Thank you, Brian, and good morning, everyone. A little bit about this last week. Something has set a fire under the legislature this year. It's moving quite quick, much quicker than it has in the previous 2 years in my mind. And there are a lot more bills going through committees now that I'm used to from the past. So it's an interesting process. And it was asked this morning, what is a study bill, an SS, a study bill? How does that differ from a Senate bill, just a regular bill like Brian was talking about? Study bills usually are generated from the committee from whence they come. There are suggestions that are made by senators in the Senate on the committees. If I'm in Human Resources, we've had several study bills that are actually generated out of that committee itself. So they usually come with a little bit of, or they're kind of predetermined before they get there, because they're a problem that this committee has worked on in the past and that has already kind of been vetted through the process. So a lot of times that's what a study bill is. Now, just a regular bill like Brian is working on here is usually an idea that comes either from the representative or the senator. In my case, the ideas normally would come from my constituents that have a problem that they'd like addressed, and those are just given just a regular, in the Senate it's called a Senate File 80, say, or Senate File 40 or whatever. They're all given a number and then assigned to the committee that they fit in. And in study bills, they're already in the committee, so they're usually the first bills that come out in a session because they've been talked about already in that committee in the past. So that is the difference between a study bill that you hear a lot about. Now, once it comes out of committee, it's given a different name. It's given a file name then, like a Senate File 40 or 80 again, because I know that's how it works. So if you always wondered what in the world are they talking about, that's sort of the short form. We did pass some bills this week, actually on the floor, to do with allowable growth for schools, and I see that's on the question, so I won't say any more about that. And we had several bills that are now out of the committees that they were assigned to, and in Human Resources, and these are actually bills that I was at on the subcommittee. I think I explained this 2 weeks ago how this all works, but it starts out in a subcommittee, a bill, and it has to get past 3 representatives out of there. It has to be at least 2 of them agree to send it on to the full committee, and then it has to pass out of the full committee before it can go to the floor of either house, and then it has to also get past the majority leader of either house, who will put it on the agenda. It gets put on the calendar, but it doesn't necessarily mean it will end up on the floor unless the majority leader puts it on the agenda. So, but we did have the bill from the House on allowable growth, which ours was different from, which actually causes a problem down the way, because since we didn't agree or amend what was sent to us, it throws kind of a wrench in the works, and that when it goes back to the House now, it doesn't match the bill in language or content, and so they have to work that all out because it has to cross the aisle twice before it can go to a conference committee. So it's not even in conference committee now, so that's delaying the process for the final allowable growth number to show up. What was passed in the Senate this week was a 4% supplemental aid for 2016 and another bill for 2017 at the same amount, and 2 bills that actually does the same amount of growth in the categoricals for schools. So those 4 bills were all at the 4% level, and as I said, they do not match up with the bills that were sent to us from the House. So it's not in conference committee yet. They're going to have to either bypass what we sent them or amend what was sent to us before it can get to that process. So I can't give you a definite answer when that final decision will be made there, but I'm pretty confident that the final allowable growth will be somewhere between 1.25, which the governor and the House recommended, and the 4% that the Senate passed. So that's enough for opening remarks, I think, and we'll take it.
Thank you both. Our first question is continuation of the education. We have several areas that we'd like to have you dwell on a little bit regarding the status of education bills. Continue on with the allowable growth, what's going on with online high school, and discuss a little bit about the school start date.
Well, the online high school is a concept that I really wasn't aware of. Of course, you know, if you're not on the committees, there's an education committee that has members appointed to sit on those committees. And if you're not on that committee, a lot of times you really don't know what's going on as far as legislation is concerned and what they've been discussing. So I don't regularly attend the education committee meetings, so I don't know how much has really been discussed about online high school, but I did Google it last night to find out, and it's just a way that if you were a homeschooler, you could use the online academy, it's called, the one that I pulled up on Google, and get support there to actually have classes that you could teach at home and do it online, which, you know, in the future, I think there's, you know, it's something we really need to look at, because it certainly has possibilities. So I have an open mind on that one completely, and it could combat the high cost of education and help us in that regard too, as well as our rural schools could use online high school in another way. You know, they could be used right in your high school to substitute for teachers, and it has possibilities. So the other part of the question is school start date. Well, right now there's been 2 bills, I believe, drafted, both identical, in the House and in the Senate, and those bills actually, and again, I'm not on the education committee, so the bills are moving the start date back to July 1, which really is going to change the code, and so that deadline that's in the code would be removed by this bill, and let's see, do I have more on it? I'd have to look and see if I've got more on it in here. But it completely changes the idea of starting on, you know, the first Monday after the first week in September, I think, something like that. So.
Yeah, on the online schooling, the way I understand it is that there's something that they call a la carte, where if you have a school that does not offer a class or does not have the professional that you need to teach a certain class, say if somebody wants to take Russian and you don't have Russian in your school, that there's a way that they could go online and take that through the state. And I don't know if that's via Skype or how that's done, but it's a way of getting that class taken care of for a student, which I think is a great thing. The full-time online, I believe there's 2 schools that are doing that, and Cam and Nita, I think, is one of them. And I think that it's a good thing in certain circumstances. For instance, if you're a person who isn't a very talented young person who travels the United States because of whatever you do, if you're an actor or whatever you're doing, you could actually get credits and get your high school diploma in a more normal way. So it gives somebody that has a very unusual lifestyle the opportunity to finish high school that way. So I don't really have a comment on if it's a good thing or bad thing. I think if at some point everybody's doing it that way, it's probably gonna turn the education system upside down. But at this point, from what I understand, is a very, very small percentage of students are taking that. But it does have its place, I do believe. As far as the start date is concerned, from what I understand, there is like Mark said, there's an agreement, or hopefully, I wouldn't necessarily call it an agreement, but a push to go with August 23rd for the start date of this year. And so that's what we're hearing right now. As far as allowable growth is concerned, again, when elected, I said that we needed to keep our budget balanced, and so I do believe that whatever comes back from the Senate, and if there's an agreement made between the House and the Senate on the amount of allowable growth, we're just going to have to carve that out somewhere else and make it work. And so that's going to be done with the leaders of both parties in the Senate and the House, and we'll see where that ends up at.
Thanks, Brian. Here's where it's at right now. I found it in our newsletter for the week. The bill is called Senate Study Bill 1058, and it came from the committee, and it's called the Repeal of the School Start Date Law. The bill was passed by a record 12-3 vote and out of the committee, and the bill repeals the school start date and waiver provisions, allowing schools to begin any time after July 1st. So that's the bill that's in the Senate. So, and it's out of committee in the Senate, which means it's now on the floor, and it's up to the majority leader to bring it up whenever he pleases. So.
Thank you. Where does the gas tax legislation stand, and when do you anticipate it taking effect?
Well, the legislation gained momentum this week, and it's now, and so that you get this in the order I want it to be. The Senate and House Transportation Subcommittees met earlier this week to officially begin open conversations regarding an increase in the state gas tax. Senate Study Bill 1168 was introduced on Tuesday with a matching bill drafted in the Iowa House. As of Thursday, it has passed out of both Senate and House subcommittees. The proposed bill would raise the state gas tax by 10 cents. The bill increases revenues to the road use tax fund and other related actions, including prohibiting county bonding with projected revenues if the debt would exceed the useful life of the project. It also would increase annual permit fees for varying load sizes. On this would be on semi-trucks we're talking about here, from a fee of $25 to $50 in 2016, and then go to $100 the following year. And those permit fees that were currently $300 will go to $400 in 2016, followed by $500 annually after that. And the single trip permits would go from 10 to 35 in 2016 and $75 after that. And the annual all systems permit from 120 to 160 in 2016 and $200 following that. The bill also extends the 2-cent gas tax differential on ethanol blended fuel through 2025 and establishes a 3-cent gas tax differential on B11 biodiesel blended fuel through 2025 under the same provisions as the ethanol differential. The ethanol and biodiesel formulas are subject to legislative review at least every 6 years. The bill uses intent language specifying the General Assembly wants the increased funding to be used in critical road and bridge repairs. If enacted, the fuel tax increase would take effect the first day of the month following the enactment. In other words, as soon as the governor signs the bill, it would start the month right after that. And what I've been hearing from a lot of constituents on this issue, and right now it's about a 50-50 match on for increasing it and 50% against it. And my position has always been in favor of increasing the tax as long as it remains constitutionally protected and they don't change the road use formula from whence we get 32.5 cents as counties. And cities will get the same amount under the Time 21. They get 20% of that road use fund. That will not change under this bill. But it does keep counties at 32.5 cents, or 32.5% of those funds to be used on roads and bridges. So that's pretty much sums up where the bill's at. And it passed out, as I said, out of both the House and the Senate this week. So it passed out of the committees. So it's up to both majority leaders in both sides of the building to bring it forward. And I understand in the scuttlebutt in the Senate is one of the Democrat senators is going to be gone all next week, so I don't see it coming to the floor next week at all. And I give it about a 50-50 chance of passing. What I'm hearing is it's always been the position of the Senate leader that at least 50% of the votes need to come from the other party. So that means we need to have, we've got 24 Republicans in the Senate. That means we need to come up with 12 or 13 votes before he's willing to bring it up. And for some reason, they don't like to bring things up if they don't think they'll pass. Now, they say they get embarrassed by that, but I don't know, that seems to be like, if that was the case, everything I brought up never passes, so, because I'm in the minority all the time. And so I'm not embarrassed by it, I'm just glad to give it a chance, so I think we ought to give it a chance.
Yeah, I've received a lot of emails. I think it's probably the hot button issue right now. And I'm getting emails and phone calls. And I agree with Mark. It's probably about 50-50, split down the middle. Within the Republican caucus, I can tell you that there is, this is an issue that there are some Republicans that would say, when I was elected, I said I would never, never, never raise taxes, and I'm sticking to that. And then there's Republicans, and I respect them for that. And there's Republicans like myself who says, okay, let's be pragmatic and let's get things done. Every time I talk to anybody, supervisors from both sides of the fence, people back in the counties in this area that are involved with road use, I think it is pretty favorable, and I think it's something that we need to do. But it's a tough call. I mean, it's always hard for me as a person who's principled and believes that we do have to keep taxes as low as possible to make our state in a competitive place. At the same time, the other side of me says, okay, we've got a situation here where we have to develop our state also. We got to keep infrastructure. We got to keep our rural areas to where people can travel on the roads. We can get our farm to market things done. So the practical side of me says that this is the right thing to do, and I do support it also.
Thank you both. At this time, I'd like to open it up to questions. Please identify yourself, and if you're representing an organization, please identify that also. We have these gentlemen until 11 o'clock. I'd like to have as many questions as possible. Mayor Schwiers has raised his hand already, so.
Mayor Adam Schwiers, I would just ask, in your conversations as you're trying to develop a consensus amongst your parties, the 4 senators that are maybe, or at least I'm hearing there's probably 8 senators in the Senate side that would be supportive, like yourself, Senator Sigebart. Of the 4, has anybody been approaching those folks to really find out from them what's holding them back? And more importantly, those people who are now against the road use tax, do they have any other ideas for us as a state to correct infrastructure utilizing our existing funds? And are they coming forward with any ideas to fix the problem?
That's 2 questions, maybe 3, actually.
He said those 4 senators, again, it goes back to the point that the majority leader would like us to put up at least half the votes. So half the votes to pass something in the Senate would be 26 votes. That means we need to come up with 13 votes out of the Republican caucus that would be in favor of it. And it's been, last year I thought we had 10 senators that probably would vote in favor of it. And this year it's probably gone backwards. It's probably like you say, and you guys out here know more about what goes on there than most people would believe. There probably are 4 that, and what are we doing? Oh, we're talking to them every day. They've been under a lot of pressure. And can I name them for you? No, I won't name them for you, but it really comes down to when the lights turn on and the voting machine turns on and you watch the votes being put up and it's kind of almost a religious thing when that happens because you're making history when that happens and you start putting votes up. And as this thing goes close to the majority at the end, you don't want to be at the end of this vote either, because you don't always want to be the person they point at as the vote that either created it or ended it. And so we keep working on it, and the public works on you every day. It's just amazing how much time the public has been giving to this issue, and so I know one thing: I don't fit in the Senate phone booth. It's an old phone booth, one of these doors you open like this. I can't get the door shut. Now that's maybe a good reason not even to go there, but maybe I've been there too long because. So that's the question. First part of the question. The other part is what do they want you to do? Well, the normal reply is that you haven't searched enough for money efficiencies. And actually, the governor asked Trombino, the director of the Department of Transportation, a year ago to come up with $50 million worth of efficiencies, and the governor's satisfied that he did that. So we've taken $50 million of waste out of the system already, and the problem is the need is growing faster than we can find efficiencies. Even if you found them, you're still going to be way behind, and we got a $50 or $200 million pothole out there now that needs fixing, and it just continues to grow at a rapid rate. So we've been trying to do this for 5 years. So we're at $210 million a year in shortfall. We're $1 billion behind in keeping up with our road projects. So I think it's time.
You had asked if anybody had, Adam, you'd asked if anybody had come up with a different plan sometime. I do know though, Walt Rogers from Waterloo is introducing an idea of taking sales tax money and earmarking that for roads, which means basically you're going to take it away from the other parts that it goes into the general fund. I believe it was 0.5% of the sales tax of the state, which he thought might help to raise some money for that. One thing just in general about the 10-cent increase is that I was looking and seeing what other states have done in our area. And one thing that's kind of interesting is that Missouri, what they've done in the past, and I don't know where they're at with their bonding right now, but I know as a state, they've bonded for hundreds of millions of dollars in order to keep their roads in good shape. You know, the one thing I'll say about what we're doing here is at least we're paying as we go, and I think that's a good thing for our state, that we're at least not passing debt down 10 or 20 years from now on the things we want to do for our roads today. So that's all I have to say about that.
Yes, sir.
Don Grants, Carroll. 2 questions. First one's a civic question. When you come up with an idea for a bill like you mentioned at the outset here, who helps you write that bill?
You want me to answer that?
And I can ask the second one first, or next. The second one is Senator Gronstel has a lot of power, as we all know. He can decide, as majority leader in the Senate, which bills we're going to talk about and which bills we can't. That does not seem very democratic to me. Is there any way that can be changed? How can that be changed?
Okay, as far as the civics question, who helps write the bill? As I said before, a bill starts out as an idea in your head, basically, is where it's at. And then you go to, in my case, being a freshman, I probably won't have to do this next year, but I go to some colleagues and just kind of run it past them and say, give me some ideas, what do you think? And kind of get a consensus. If it's something that has a chance of passing, it's something that will be popular. And then the next thing you do, that I did, is I went to the caucus experts who, both the Democratic and Republican caucus has experts within a certain field. In this case, I went to our expert in education. His name's Jason Chapman, and he serves for the Republicans on the Education Committee. And I said, okay, I want to write this bill. And I had to give him my idea in about 3 sentences, and then he takes it for me to the Legislative Services Agency, which is nonpartisan. They are very talented and brilliant lawyers that work down there who will make sure that a bill is written in the correct manner so that it doesn't come under scrutiny 2 or 3 years from now. And those are always the dangers of a layman like myself, writing an actual bill. I present the idea, but these folks know how to write it, know that it's going to be written in the manner that it has to, all the legalities are there. And then the Legislative Services Agency emailed me on Friday and says, okay, and I should be using the word draft right now because it's not a bill yet, but they said your draft is done. Now you can take it and you can take it to the experts in the House, who will now give it to the Speaker, and then he can decide if this is going to go any further. He can assign it to a committee, and then it'll have to go to a subcommittee, pass a subcommittee, and then go to the actual committee, and then it'll go to the House floor to be debated, and the governor will have to sign it. So that's kind of the order of how that goes. As far as the procedural issues in the Senate, where a lot of things just don't make it to the floor or have a chance to get voted on, I mean, I think we saw that obviously at the federal level too. I honestly, maybe Mark has more information on that than I do. I don't know the answer to that question.
Begging for the microphone.
Thank you, Brian. You did a good job with the other part of it, very well. When the session begins, you adopt, on the very first day, you adopt rules. They're temporary rules. And it's just how you're going to operate, what procedure, what part of the, Robert's Rules of Order, you know, and that sort of thing. And there's a rule in there called Rule 42. And just last week, we actually had to adopt the permanent rules because those rules we adopted on the first day were just temporary rules. So before we could do anything else, we had to adopt permanent rules. And we offered an amendment in the Senate from the minority side to change the rules that would say that if you had 26, now if Brian takes his bill and he goes around and gets 26 other senators to co-sponsor it, it means that says that bill must go and get assigned to a subcommittee. The rules say that. But our amendment said that if you have 26 names on your bill, it has to come out of that committee and it has to come to the floor. And we got voted down on a 26-24 vote on that. So we didn't get that rule changed, but that's the rules of the Senate, and it's the same rules in the House, and that's our dilemma. We're under a set of rules that allows the majority leader to set the agenda on the final analysis.
And the vote was probably.
And the federal government works the same way.
Right.
And so that's why we're kind of dysfunctional on occasion, because one person can stop a bill, even though 26 senators. And to get 26 in the Senate, you have to realize that's a bipartisan thing. That means that two Democrats had to join with the Republicans to get it, or vice versa. 2 Republicans would have to join with the Democrats to get it veto proof by the majority leader. So, but again, it failed. So it's not for lack of trying that we don't try to change that, but that's just the way the system works at this time. And I was asked that question in that phone booth the other day, and I don't think I did as good a job of explaining it in that phone booth as I did now. So thank you.
Jean Lees, and I'm from Carroll. And I'd like to get your take on the Medicaid managed care shift that's going to be taking place within, I guess, the next year, the beginning of next year, and how it's going to affect my daughter. My daughter was born with multiple disabilities, and she has long-term needs. She's lived at home with us for 25 years, and has been out here at New Hope Village now for 15 years. And New Hope has done an outstanding as a matter of fact, we moved to Carroll, so Kate could actually live out her life here at New Hope Village. But I'm telling you, when I hear these phrases as a parent about Medicaid managed care and cost containment and saving $51 million in the first 6 months of the next fiscal year, I become very concerned and frightened for my daughter's future. And I guess what I need to know from you, if you can answer, is how is this going to affect my daughter's care? Costs. How are you going to affect her care? And is it going to result in cuts to her services and in cuts to reimbursement payments to the medical providers? And do you have any idea how those costs are going to be spread out and what populations it's going to affect?
Thank you, Gene. That's the question I've been asking in our Health and Human Service Budget Subcommittees, which both Brian and I sit on. I as the ranking member and he as the co-chair, and so vice chair. Okay. I don't have answers for all those questions, but here's I'll try to address the managed care issue. Managed care is that's, nobody really knows what that means at the moment. In fact, next week, the RFP, it's called, the request for proposals, is going to be, and that's really it's like hiring somebody. You need, here's what we need for that managed care to do, and then people will bid on it, and we don't know who the bidders are, but it's a big deal. That's probably, as Dave Heaton, the representative, who's the chairman of the committee, told me the other night in a private conversation we were having, that it's a $4 billion deal for Iowa. So it's a huge thing, and the management has been through the Department of Human Service in the past, and so cost containment, that proposal is probably going to come out next week, and after that, that's something the committee has been crying for a month now, because we're asking the same questions you're asking, and there's a lot of nervous people out there. Until we see that RFP, we're not sure just what the requirements are going to be. So we'll have better answers for that question after that RFP process goes through. But there's a lot of good providers out there that need support, and part of the problem for the state's budget this year is that our Medicaid reimbursement rate was increased, so it's going to cost us, the state, $200 million more in reimbursements for Medicaid than it did a year ago. That's the projection. Usually projections don't come true. It didn't come true last year. It was only about half that much. So, but our growth rate for the state was $200 million last year. So you see right there, the one offsets the other one, and so this year's budget process is very difficult because we really don't see any growth there to account for growth in government. And if you ask, I was elected on not growing government, so I want, but the dilemma is here: how do we maintain those services we need with that shrinking budget, and Iowa always being penalized for having a good economy, which is changing quite rapidly out there if you paid any attention to the farming community. And the governor's budget proposal was actually a deficit budget. It was going to spend more money than we brought in. So we've been trying to preserve that $1 billion of extra reserve we've grown in the last few years because we had a good economy, because we know we have expenses here in the next few years that are really going to chew into that quite rapidly. So we're sympathetic with your cause, though. The whole committee is really keeping Department of Human Services' feet to the fire on this issue. And we just heard last week from Rick Schultz, who described how the regions are doing. We just went through this mental health redesign a year ago, and the goal of that was to kind of overhaul the whole system, which is a scary thing to do in the first place. But because of the places like Corinda and Mount Pleasant, which were built in the 1800s, and it was an institution. You put people in there and they stayed there forever. A a lot of that has changed, and it's very expensive to do that or try to maintain that old system. So with mental health redesign, there was a bunch of core services that every region is being asked to provide for their mentally ill clients. And that set of core services has core plus services, which means each region can improve on what's out there and create a better system that would be localized so that the clients would be closer to home than they were when they had to go either to one of the 4 institutions. And through that mechanism would be able to create a better system than we currently have. So we're in the growing pains of that right now, but this managed care seems to be the thing that has popped up this year. I wish it wouldn't have popped up this year because it's hard enough to get the system up and running without throwing in another big problem. And managed care is one of the biggest one right now, and we don't have a good answer for it because we really don't know what they're going to be assigned to care for until we see that RFP.
Yeah, Mark and I sit on that same committee, we go to the same meetings, and I think we both sit there and wonder, okay, how are we gonna formulate a budget when we don't even have an RFP and don't even know what we're working with? And it's kind of like, things are a little bit upside down for us right now. I understand that managed care is probably gonna be the thing in the future. There's probably nothing that we can do to totally stop it. Other states are doing it. I think it's just the new model.
Are they doing it successfully?
That, I don't know. And one thing I would say is that our job is to make sure that if and when this does happen, that these folks are held accountable, that the entities that are taking care of the managed care are still going to have to prove that there is access to the things that you need, and that one thing that managed care, it can be a good thing because you're probably going to eliminate some duplication of services. So from that standpoint, and from that, I believe that there probably are some good things they can do to make sure that things are done in an efficient manner. But if that then becomes a situation where a person who needs services, it slows it down, because sometimes in the healthcare business that we're in, we see managed care situations where it does slow down access to the services that people need, and that is that's my concern with managed care. So, and I think Representative Heaton, who is the chair, he's got a heart of gold, and he will make sure that things do get done, that people don't suffer because of managed care, because it can be a double-edged sword. It can do some good things, and it can create some problems too. One thing that concerns me a little bit about the home-based community thing that's going on now with the Olmstead Act, was something that was passed a long time ago. It was basically said that everybody needs to have access to community, to getting them out of institutional settings and into homes, get them as close to the community as you can. And one thing that I see happening with government, that it's kind of it can be a good thing. What they're saying here is a good thing. We need to let these people get out there. But how about somebody who is in an ICF, who is with folks that have the same issues that they do, who doesn't want to go out into home-based community? We're forcing that hand, and government sometimes, it gets a little too big, and they make decisions, and they say, okay, we know what's best for you. Well, it is good for folks to be able to get out in the community if they want to, but if you prefer to be with 8 of your peers in a ICF setting, you should have that right also. And that's what I don't like about what's going on right now, is it seems like you got to go out in the home. You got to go out in your own house, and what's it going to cost, and what's it going to do for that person? If you're spending twice as much money to try to keep that person happy, yet you're taking happiness away from them. You're putting them in a situation that they don't want to be in. So that is a concern that I have also.
Go ahead.
Mark Beardmore, Carroll County Board of Supervisors. I think I'm just going to speak for myself. Back on the gas tax, I think we look at various views on the board and how this thing should go down. But I'm just going to ask your guys' feedback on this, what you're witnessing down there. It looks as though everything that's been reported thus far is all of this time and effort on how we're going to make up this $210 million shortfall. Are we going to fund it with 10 cents, 8 cents? Is it going to include permit fees, license fees, time 21. We've put in so much time and energy in how we're gonna fund this thing. But is there equal amount of time being spent on how we're gonna spend this thing? Because there's nothing more infuriating, I've shared with you before, seeing these guys put brine out on a 0% precipitation day. And if we're just gonna fund this thing without any type of measurements, in fact, if this thing's being sold as roads and bridges, okay, is it gonna go to roads and bridges? I don't think any of us have a problem if it goes to roads and bridges. But if it's gonna go to their general operational fund, you might wanna consider 20 cents. I mean, we gotta make sure that this 10 cents, this $210 million, we have a situation with our federal bridges, we're running out of bridges to do. And if it gets into that type of situation locally, it's a poor investment. And so if we can ensure that this thing gets dedicated to roads and bridges, which are direly needed, no one's gonna deny that, then I think it's gonna be a worthwhile investment, and I urge you to move on. But I think we need to put as much time and energy in how this thing's gonna get spent as we are how we're gonna acquire it. Fair? Your observation, what do you see?
Yeah, I agree with that, and I believe that the way it looks in the House is that's where they want it to go. Roads and bridges, constitutionally protected, and not going to other general funds or anything like that. It's going to be categorized, and I believe it's going to go just directly to roads and bridges. Yes.
Thanks for your comments, Mark. What I had was a handout here last week that showed the amounts that would go to each county in Iowa from a 10-cent tax increase. And it amounted to, for Crawford, about $770,000, and Carroll was right in there somewhere, $750 or about the same amount. And now that would be money, as I understand it correctly, that you would get through to your engineer. And we talked about this in our caucus, and I'm not supposed to reveal what happens in caucus, but somebody said they'd asked their supervisor, what would that do for you? Well, and the comment was, well, it'd buy some more gravel, but it wouldn't build a new bridge, and it probably wouldn't fix too many more than 2 miles of Old County Highway. So, that's where it needs to go, and that's why it's so tough to get the votes in the Republican side, because their fear is that it won't end up where it's supposed to be. And I think that's why this bill that I read to you, the last part of it was to concentrate that money on roads and bridges so that it's followed through the system so you can see where it got spent and that it's going to where it's supposed to go. But that's pretty much true. We always spent about $1 million in buying gravel in Crawford because I shouldn't bash our grader operators, but we always threw it in the ditch, after a snowstorm. So,
That never happens here.
but it takes about $1 million. There's a big hole up to the north here in Sac County that's there because we keep getting our gravel up there, and I think you guys do too. It's not as much money as you would think. To get to the county, $770,000 is a nice pile of money, but that's not really going to help you that much if we could unencumber some of our federal dollars would do a lot of more good, because you see the feds match about half of what we put in it is federal money, and they've got all kinds of restrictions on that money, and that's how you end up with, if you go to, I always talk about Wisconsin because it's easier to talk about Wisconsin. You go up there, you see beautiful red bridges that match the stone along the way, and they're all textured, and that's an extra expense, very expensive to do that. So we don't want to see that happen here in Iowa. God forbid we beautify the state while we're spending your tax dollars. So that's my comment.
Mark, we appreciate the 700, but again, the purpose of my question was, I'm not concerned how we're spending it. I'm more concerned with how the orange trucks are spending it.
Yeah.
A lot of waste out there.
Marty?
Thank you.
Marty Danzer with Carroll County Board of Supervisors. I had a little discussion with our sheriff yesterday, and Brian, you commented a little bit about it on the mental health closing down of the facilities. And the three places that they're looking are going to community-based homes, the jails, and then the nursing homes. And in the discussion with the sheriff yesterday, they had a mental health client that was in the jail, and he was just mesmerized. He stood in a jail cell for 24 hours, didn't move, didn't say a word. And we need to worry about the clients and not the dollars as far as mental health. And what have you guys done as far as looking at solutions for those people that can't adapt to being in these homes?
Well, Marty brings up an issue we hear a lot about every week, and that's the fact that our mental illness facilities are really lacking. And this was before we were talking about closing Clarinda and Mount Pleasant. And I think the committee's feeling is now pretty much that we're moving too quickly away from those settings, because those are some of the places that you can send patients that are in critical need and have critical issues. We had a psychiatrist talk to Human Resources last week from Cedar Rapids, and he said that there are places the sheriff will bring, or the police department will bring them into the ERs, and sometimes they spend three days in the ER before they can find a bed for them. And of course, this is not a good situation at all. So it's a real critical need, and we're going to have to handle that one. There's one part of the thing that happened last year that was a good thing that got vetoed, and that was a system where a computer system that would track beds in the state, that you could, as a sheriff, could go to that computer website and find a room, a bed for this client that needs to be committed. And it failed to get funded. It was in the omnibus bill that the governor vetoed entirely. And so we got we're in the process of making sure that that's in this system this year, because that would certainly help. Sheriffs are crying out there, literally, on this issue, and it's very important. So.
Yeah, this affects the sheriffs at the county level. It also, like Mark was saying, it also affects a lot of hospitals where you've got somebody who came into the ER and having an acute, really bad psychotic episode or whatever's going on, and they could be violent. And here they are sitting in a jail cell or a hospital emergency room for a week, sometimes, before they can get a bed for them. So I realize that we do need to keep in mind that we've got to keep those places available. One thing that I believe the governor's Chuck Palmer, I think, is the person who's the head of HHS, and he mentioned that he thought, well, he said that there are as many beds now available as there were before because of independents being able to create more beds. And I think there's some conversation about the reality of that also, but if that's actually happening. But that's not a good system. It's not good. It's expensive. It's very expensive for hospitals and jails to be holding these folks. There's something called I don't remember the name of the act, but it's anti-dumping, which means basically once you take, or EMTALA, yeah, thanks Ed. So once you take these patients in, until you find a suitable place for them, you can't set them out, which I understand that does make sense, but if we're going to do that, we need to find a place for these folks so they can get care, because they're not even being treated. They're just being, it's kind of a triage. You're just holding them there until you can find something for them. So if they're sitting there for a week, in Carroll, I believe that there's things that probably can be done that give them a little bit of help, because you've got some psychologists and some folks here that can help them out. But if you can imagine being in a community way out in the rural areas with no mental health professionals to help this person who's sitting for 7 days in an ER and nobody even knows what to do for him, that's a really uncomfortable situation for the professionals in that area, and also for the patient who's not getting any care. So I understand what you're saying, and I agree with you, Marty.
Speed limit, there's some proposals that are beginning to emerge on that. On the highways in our state, there's three speed limits on the roads that most of us take, Highway 30 to 71, 55, rural interstates, rural 4-lane state roads 65 and then the rural interstate 70. There's a proposal to increase the rural interstates to 75, and I think there's some other ideas. What do you think the speed limit should be? Should we see an increase in any of those three? And what would you support? And is there any likelihood that we'll see an increase by July 1st?
Yeah, I think Senator Zahn is the one that's pushing for the 75 on the interstates. And he states that there's been some studies done showing that there's no rise in danger or death involved with accidents at 75. I believe he stated that, and if that were the case, and that were the case on the 55 going to 60, raising everything up by 5 miles an hour, if there's no huge increase in risk, then I would be for that. I think just keeping things moving is fine. They say that our interstates were actually built to take higher traffic speeds than what we put on them when we're going 70, and I have no problem with it at all. I think it'll be fine.
75 on our interstate system, our federal system I don't have a problem with that at all, because it's controlled access, and you have on-ramps and off-ramps and ability, and like Brian says, they were designed, I think, for higher speeds than 75 even, so that's a good idea. It'll save gas, or maybe even use more gas, depending on the vehicle you're driving. You just can't get away from it.
And they spend less time on our roads.
But when you're talking about like a 4-lane Highway 20, where some places it is controlled access, and other places you get out in the rural areas, like straight north of here on 20, you've got an intersection at every mile, and there's no on-ramp to it really, and they can cross all 4 lanes of traffic. That's very dangerous, and I think 65 is plenty fast for that road, and nobody drives 65 anyway. You all realize that. They're all driving 5 miles over that, so they're already driving 70. Plus, it takes the ability of law enforcement to pull somebody over if they suspect something else might be going on there, and at 65, they've got a good reason to do that. And the 2-lane roads, again, at 60, you're driving 65, putting everybody. I hate to tell you what they drive on 235 going to the Capitol on Monday mornings. I have plenty of stories about that, but we've got to hurry on here, so thank you.
Yes, Debbie.
I'm Viola Snyder. I'm a mother of 10, have 4 children, and they're my 9 grandchildren here in the education system in Iowa. So I am seriously, have a serious problem with this bill. Group's Iowa School Bullying Bill could use improvements. We spend the majority of our taxpayer money on education. And when my 9 children I raised were in school, we were top in the nation or second. And now we're way down the line. I believe, and from reading this article, we do have, our legislative did put in a anti-bullying bill, and I've got it, code number 104, and it comprises 3 pages, very easily understood. Well, the left, or here is Patricia Nell Warren. She's the writer of America's largest homosexual magazine, The Advocate, says, whoever captures the kids owns the future, and we're all aware of that. But why then are we letting them take our bullying system hostage in our schools? They want $1 million, but we, our legislature, I think, are talking about $200,000 now, and it's going to nonprofits supports anti-bullying measures in Iowa, primarily for the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transsexual community. And this, Nate Monson is executive of that Iowa Safe Schools. And Penny Biscanano, she oversees the implementation of the OWA's bullying prevention program, an international program. It certifies our educators in 18 months. And why? And they also, I can, 3-page here is easily understood. I don't know why 18 months of time of our teachers. They're intelligent people that we take for granted. And they not only want to take care, I'd say, indoctrinate in school, but they want to address bullying outside of school grounds and expand the definition of cyberbullying. Even the American Civil Liberties Union is against that.
All I can say to that is, I don't think anybody in this room believes that bullying is a good thing, and I think that comes along with the teachers to recognize what's going on, things like that. I think it's really hard for government to legislate behavior. And so I believe that the governor has good intentions, and but for me, as a lawmaker, I'm sitting here and saying, okay, we're going to have to tell people how to behave, and that's a tough one for me. That's where I stand on it. I mean, I haven't done a whole lot of research on what the actual legislation would be or how we're going to do this, but anytime we're controlling somebody's behavior, that's really a tough call. So I guess I'm just kind of on the fence on that one. I have to learn more about that.
Thanks, Brian. Bullying is something I think we've all experienced in our life, and you can pass 10 laws on bullying, and it may have no effect at all. Bullies are made, I think, and they're not going to change their ways just because you passed a law. So it needs to be something that's fair to everyone, and part of the governor's proposal here is to educate our teachers a little better on how to handle those situations. Is that a good idea? Yeah, I think it is probably a good idea, because the world is so politically correct anymore that teachers are afraid to do anything, actually, in fear of getting sued over the process. And the protection for them is important because they're the ones that can actually nip bullying in the bud, so to speak. And having another law that picks out one entity in particular, it's focused on one group rather than the general public, is probably not going to solve the problem at all. So.
I think we're over the time. I'd like to thank Senator Sagard, Representative Best. At this time, I'd like to recognize the Legislative Committee. If you're here, please stand and so that we can thank you. These individuals meet every 2 weeks and prepare for this event. So. I believe these two gentlemen will be around for a couple of minutes if you have any issues that you would like to discuss that weren't here. So, and thank you all for coming out on a cold day